it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
So, hi there, pop pickers, boys and girls, everybody out there on the planet. This is Gregory here, and this is Bob Dylan, a head full of ideas. We're now on season 4, I believe this is episode 10. And this is part 1 of examination of Dylan's love songs of the mid-60s. And the subtitle of this one is It Used to Go Like This, which you may recognise, but we'll see anyway. I'm going to begin with a couple of quotes from extremely famous poems. The first is from Sonnet 130, written by William Shakespeare, of course, and it goes like this. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. And the other poem, which Bob Dylan has apparently said is his favourite poem ever, so I'm going to have that really. My love is like a red, red rose that's nearly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. Robert Burns, A Red, Red Rose. In the early 1960s, Bob Dylan was an extremely prolific writer, producing so much quality material that much of it would not fit on his albums. From a distance of several decades, it's sometimes necessary to remind ourselves that despite the sophistication of the songs and their plethora of literary and musical references, Dylan was then still only in his early 20s. The evolution of his love songs from 1964 and 1965 reflects the longings, disappointments and emotional chaos that often characterise a period of life in which relationships start to become serious, yet may be subject to sudden and volatile change. While it is often a risky enterprise to relate particular songs to specific lovers, although fans are naturally tempted to do so, the historical facts of Dylan's relationships with women in this part of his life are well known. In these early years at Greenwich Village, he hooked up with the artist Susie Rutola, who was just 19 when she appeared on the iconic cover of Freewheeling Bob Dylan. She is said to have stimulated Dylan's political awareness, encouraged him to compose the series of protest songs that made his name. Within a year, Dylan had become world famous. Fame, of course, often brings sexual temptation, and like many young male stars of the period, there is little doubt that he indulged in affairs and liaisons with a number of female entertainers and celebrities. Among the best known were Edie Sedgwick, a model who was a scion of Andy Warhol's factory. Nico, the German chanter, has later become involved with the Velvet Underground. And of course Joan Baez, who was a similar age to Dylan, but had been a prominent folk singer since the age of 18. It is likely that these relationships overlapped with each other before he secretly married model Sarah Lowndes in late 1965. The love songs that he composed during this period run the full gamut of emotion, from ecstatic avowals, confusion and uncertainty to extreme bitterness. They are sometimes comical, sometimes bleak, and occasionally joyful. His earlier love songs had tended to be either pure expressions of devotion or nostalgia, like Girl from the North Country, Tomorrow's a Long Time, and Boots of Spanish Leather, or philosophically detached observations on the end of relationships, like Don't Think Twice It's Alright or One Too Many Mornings. But as he matured, the range of songs rapidly became broader and their nature more complex. Dylan was reading voraciously at this time, and his major literary influences, which included the Beat Poets, Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, Rimbaud and Shakespeare, were being subsumed into his writing. Equally influential, however, were the popular songs from a range of sources. Up until the 1960s, the love song was easily the most dominant lyrical construct in all forms of popular music. Well, I guess it still is dominant, isn't it? But mainstream show tunes, however, tended to be overly sentimental, often presenting an idealised view of love which would last forever. In the blues, the dominant mode was the opposite, really. There was that meditation on broken relationships. This was often a coded representation of the lives of suffering that many black people were enduring. Yet male blues singers in particular tended to counter this with sexual boasting. That's a tendency we maybe see in modern hip-hop as well. It was country music, mainly the music of poor whites in the southern states, that the tradition of emotional realism in American song became most clearly established. Songs like Cold, Cold Heart and Your Cheating Heart by Hank Williams, who Dylan in his poem for Joni called his first hero, were mostly focused on the emotional pain of heartbreak. Williams was deeply influenced by the blues, but his songs conveyed this pain in a visceral way that included strongly self-deprecating elements. He presented himself as vulnerable in a manner that sophisticated singers like Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin could never convincingly convey. A song like I Fall to Pieces, written by Hank Cochran and Harlan Howard, allows Patsy Cline to confess her own emotional instability with considerable emotional power. She Thinks I Still Care, written by Stephen Duffy and Dick Lipscomb by George Jones, depicts a lover whose attitude to his ex is nothing less than callous. Just Can't Live That Fast Anymore, recorded by Lefty Frizzle and Webb Pierce's There Stands the Glass, catalogued the effects of alcohol and depression in destroying loving relationships. Many of Dylan's own love songs of this period reflect such emotional realism, although he tends to disguise his true feelings with obfuscation and a poetic sensibility that renders the songs capable of multiple interpretations. Ballad in Plain D from Another Side of Bob Dylan, 1964, however, is a bit of an exception. It's a rather problematic work. He describes an actual incident from his life in graphic detail and expresses his own pain and disgust at what happened in unequivocal terms. The song relates the story of Dylan's confrontation with Carla Rotolo, Susie's older sister, who strongly disapproved of her siblings' romance with the scruffy young beatnik singer. It has a strong melody derived from the traditional Scottish air The False Bride, whose protagonist describes the pain he experiences when his lover marries another man. Dylan's vocal performance is compelling, and the recording includes an effective and poignant harmonica solo. It also has a number of evocative lines, such as "Shattered as a child to the shadows, leaving all of love's ashes behind me," and most movingly, "I think of her often and hope whoever she's met will be fully aware of how precious she is." There is little doubt that the raw emotion Dylan expresses here is genuine, but in the song's 8 minutes and 13 four-line verses, there's scant musical variation, and the tone is, I'm afraid, uniformly depressing, which of course is very unusual for a Dylan song. Dylan expresses his feelings with considerable venom, but lines like "For her parasite sister, I had no respect" present a very one-sided account. Later, he rather viciously describes nailing her in the ruins of her pettiness. He has often been highly creative with his use of para-rhyme, but the first couplet, "I once loved a girl, her skin it was bronze, with the innocence of a lamb, she was gentle like a fawn," is really extremely patronising towards its subject, and it does set an awkward precedent. Later, he characterises their relationship rather bizarrely as a magnificent mantelpiece. Other inelegant phrases include silhouetted anger to manufactured peace, the timeless explosion of fantasy's dream, the tombstones of damage, and finally the fake profundity of "I answered them most mysteriously, are birds free from the chains of the skyway," which sounds, like it might be profound, but it isn't really. The song also has a number of rather forced phrases. "From her mother and sister, though close did they stay. Beneath the bare light bulb, the plaster did pound, and she in between, the victim of sound." It's as if Dylan is striving to be poetic in a rather contrived way, but that the emotion he feels has for once blinded him to any kind of lyrical discipline. The most effective lines in the song are those in which the singer, with disarming honesty, admits that he is as much to blame for what happened as the parasite sister. "Myself, for what I did, I cannot be excused," he sings. "The changes I was going through can't even be used." He admits that the words to say "I'm sorry" I haven't found yet. Despite the song's many flaws and its uncharacteristic plunges into doggerel and spitefulness, it does have a quality of raw emotional honesty which echoes that of some of the more outspoken country singers. Dylan's never performed the song live. A few covers exist, including versions by Michael Chapman and Gordon Lightfoot. But Dylan himself confessed in a 1985 with Bill Flanagan that putting this highly uncharacteristic song out had actually been a mistake. The Another Side album marked Dylan's retreat from topical songs. By the time of its release, the landscape of American popular music had been completely changed by the unprecedented, all-conquering success of the Beatles. Many of Dylan's folk singer contemporaries regarded the British Beat Group as purveyors of mindless commercialism, but Dylan quite correctly recognised them as the avatars of the massive transformation of American rock music that was very soon to come. His own move into playing with rock bands would soon be another major factor in this huge cultural shift, but on another side, he was still working acoustically. Despite this, a number of the album's songs seem to anticipate the imminent move into rock. These songs approach the subject of love playfully and even, in true rock and roll style, sexily. Spanish Harlem Incident is a distinctly lustful ode to a sensual gypsy girl that the narrator encounters in a district of New York that had already been immortalised in Spanish Harlem, written by Jerry Lieber and Phil Spector, and first recorded by Ben E. King in 1961. This is a memorable soul ballad with poetic lyrics which describe a beautiful woman as a lone rose growing in the harsh environment of the ghetto. Dylan, however, goes straight for the jugular. His song, which has 6 verses and no chorus and refrain, boasts a rock-style rhythmic pulse driven by a strongly Latin guitar riff. It can be regarded as something of a lost classic in Dylan's oeuvre. There is only one known live performance, although there are a number of rock covers, including versions by the Byrds and Joan Osborne, and an especially spirited take by Dion DiMucci. From the outset, the girl is described as decidedly hot. Gypsy girl, hands of Harlem, Dylan begins, cannot hold you to its heat. He continues, your temperature's too hot for taming, your flaming feet are burning up the street. He implores her to take me into the reach of your rattling drums, and declares, using barely disguised innuendo, that you got me swallowed. In another vivid phrase, we hear that she has pearly eyes so fast and flashing diamond teeth. But this is not simply a tale of lust. It seems that the girl is a fortune teller who the singer playfully demands to reveal his fortune and his lifelines. Indeed, she appears to represent some kind of key to his future. The penultimate verse features Dylan musing, I've been wondering all about me, ever since I seen you there. We get the impression that he's not really formed any relationship or connection with the girl, but has merely been inspired by her to create sexier music. In the final triumphant verse, he declares, you have slayed me, you have made me, which is followed by the rather extraordinary visceral, I've got to laugh halfway off my heels, and then a final teasing and slightly surreal appeal to the girl, I gotta know, babe, will you surround me? Which is followed by the rather wonderful, if surprisingly introspective concluding line, so I can know if I am really real. On another side, Dylan embraces the implicit sexuality of rock and roll, which the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were currently exploiting while performing in front of hordes of screaming fans. Soon the girls would be screaming at Dylan too. Rock and roll, especially transmitted through the figures of Elvis, Little Richard, Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry, had been Dylan's first musical love. In a hugely controversial move, he would enter the fray of the rock world in a very uncompromising manner. Rather than adding a few musicians to provide tasteful accompaniment, he would lead a band playing loud blues-based rock. In doing so, he would permanently alter the nature of the rock medium itself, demonstrating that electrified music could showcase complex lyrics. Spanish Harlem Incident is a kind of rehearsal for this coming move. The figure of the girl represents the sensuality and power that tends to be missing in the earnest genre of folk music. Dylan leaves us in no doubt that he is fascinated by and highly allured by the prospect of embracing the broader musical horizons that will soon follow. The 2 songs which bookend the album, All I Really Want to Do and It Ain't Me Babe, double as personal statements about where Dylan stands in his career. On the album, he delivers All I Really Want to Do in one take as a comic piece with deliberately exaggerated sentiments and even a little judicious yodeling, echoing the style of country stars like Jimmy Rogers and Hank Williams. Yodeling was kind of out-fashioned by then, although Frank, I feel, did have a hit with I Remember You, in which he did yodeling. So, yes, anyway, Dylan doesn't tend to yodel anymore. The song is perhaps his most playful address to a lover. Throughout the performance, he seems to be finding it hard to stop laughing. The song was performed frequently in 64 and 65, often as a final encore. Slightly ironic touch that perhaps. It was revived in 1978 in a full band arrangement with flute and saxophone, no less. After that, it was largely retired from live performances, although there have been many cover versions in what appears to be, at least on the surface, an appealing and witty pop number. Cher had a hit with the song at the same time as the Byrds, and it was later recorded by the Hollies, the McCoys, Peggy Lee, Brian Ferry, and many others, the majority of whom treat it as a conventional love song. The song has 6 verses, all of which end in the tongue-twisting, tongue-in-cheek refrain, "All I really want to do is baby be friends with you." The word friends is frequently given ironic emphasis. Most of the other lines rely on repetition, mainly of you. The piling on of repetition, of the emphasis on the narrator pleading with the object of the song, has a comic effect. This is enhanced by the frequent use of internal rhyme. The song begins, "I ain't looking to compete with you, beat or cheat or mistreat you, simplify you, classify you, deny, defy or crucify you." We may at first assume that this is directed at a potential lover who is sensitive to misogynist treatment. Perhaps it's a clever ruse by the narrator in chatting up a woman, but the emphasis on the internal rhymes beat, cheat, simplify, classify and deny, defy sounds in Dylan's delivery as if he is playing a game with the lover, presenting himself as rather charmingly assertive while still respecting her dignity and independence. The rest of the song follows a similar pattern. The narrator declares that he does not want to frighten you, tighten you, shock or knock or lock you up or drag you down or chain you down or bring you down. Later he denies wanting to analyse, categorise, finalise or advertise her, to disgrace you, displace you, define you, confine you, or to select you, dissect you, inspect you, reject you. It kind of almost runs out of rhymes there, doesn't it? In the final verses, the pattern changes slightly as he states, "I don't want to meet your kin, make you spin or do you in." Finally, he vows that I ain't looking for you to feel like me, see like me, or be like me. It's a memorable comic turn, with the aggressive harmonica playing between the verses, emphasising the mock pleading tone. On second listen, perhaps, fans may theorise that the song is actually directed towards them. This effect is achieved by Dylan refusing to give us any specifics of the relationship. We never find out whether this is a romantic relationship or not, although the hit version by the Byrds, which is graced by the sublime 3-part harmonies of Roger McGuinn, Gene Clark and David Crosby, presents the song as a more straightforward declaration of love. Some fans, however, suspected that Dylan was using the song to tell his listeners that he was not happy in the role of a prophet, a sage or the leader of any kind of movement. At the Newport Folk Festival on 24th of July 1964, where he performed an early version of the song, folk singer Ronnie Weaver had introduced him with the words, "And here he is, take him, you know him, he's yours." In Chronicles Volume 1, Dylan reflects with horror on this statement, which he takes as an indication that he was now regarded as public property. Many of those in the folk movement looked on him as a political spokesperson. This was a role that, especially in the wake of the assassination of Kennedy, he was already feeling distinctly uneasy with. Okay, so this podcast is so long, it's going to be broken up probably into 3 bits, and you can hear the next bit. It begins with me talking about innate eBay. That'll come next time. So see you then. Bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?